David Rodriguez never thought he'd own a house with a swimming pool. Growing up in a small apartment with his single mother, he used to walk past the fancy neighborhoods just to look at the big houses with their perfect lawns and sparkling pools. Back then, those houses seemed like they belonged in a different world. But here he was, 34 years old, standing in his own backyard, watching his 8-year-old daughter Isabella splash around in their very own pool. It had taken him 15 years of working nights while going to law school, then grinding through long hours at a small firm, and finally starting his own practice. Every sacrifice had led to this moment. The house wasn't the biggest on Maple Street, but it was theirs. A cozy 2-story home with white shutters and a red front door that Isabella had picked out herself. The backyard was David's favorite part. It wasn't huge, but it had enough space for the pool, a wooden deck, and a small garden where his wife Carmen grew tomatoes and herbs. Today was special. Isabella's 8th birthday party was in full swing, and the July heat made the pool the perfect centerpiece for the celebration. David had spent the morning setting up colorful balloons and streamers around the deck. Carmen had been cooking since dawn, preparing all of Isabella's favorite foods. The guest list was small but meaningful. David's parents, Miguel and Rosa, had driven up from their old neighborhood. His father still worked at the same factory where he'd spent the last 30 years, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. They were so proud of David that they told everyone at church about their son, the lawyer, and his beautiful home. David's younger brother, Carlos, was there too, along with his wife and their twin boys. Carlos taught middle school math and always joked that David got all the brains in the family, but David knew better. Carlos had a gift with kids that no law degree could teach. The Johnsons from next door had stopped by with their 2 kids. Tom and Linda Johnson had been the first neighbors to welcome the Rodriguez family when they moved in 6 months ago. They'd brought over a homemade apple pie and helped David figure out how to work the sprinkler system. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow from across the street, sat in the shade with Rosa, both women sharing stories about their grandchildren. At 78, Mrs. Patterson moved slowly but had a sharp mind and an endless supply of cookies for the neighborhood kids. The Chen family from 2 houses down had also joined the party. Dr. Chen worked at the local hospital, and his wife ran a small bakery downtown. Their teenage son, Kevin, was helping Isabella and the other kids with pool games, even though he was probably too old for such things. Isabella was the star of the show, of course. She wore her new pink swimsuit and had insisted on wearing her birthday crown even in the pool. Her friends from school, Amy and Zoe, were having a blast playing Marco Polo and diving for pool toys. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, mixing with the music playing softly from the deck speakers. David stood by the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, feeling content in a way he'd never experienced before. Carmen walked over and handed him a cold beer, planting a quick kiss on his cheek. "You did good, counselor," she whispered, using the nickname she'd given him back in law school. "We did good," he corrected, wrapping his free arm around her waist. The party had been going for about 2 hours and everyone was relaxed and happy. The adults chatted about work, neighborhood gossip, and summer vacation plans while keeping an eye on the kids in the pool. David's father was telling Tom Johnson about his plans to retire next year, while Carlos and Dr. Chen discussed the upcoming school year. David had just finished putting a fresh batch of hot dogs on the grill when he noticed Isabella organizing a synchronized swimming routine with her friends. She was such a natural leader, always coming up with games and making sure everyone was included. It reminded him of Carmen, who had the same gift for bringing people together. The afternoon sun was starting to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the deck. David was thinking about bringing out the birthday cake soon when he heard car doors slamming in his driveway. He figured it might be one of Carmen's co-workers stopping by, as she'd mentioned inviting a few people from the office. But something felt different about the sound. There was an urgency to it that made David look up from the grill. Through the wooden fence that separated his backyard from the driveway, he could hear heavy footsteps and what sounded like radio chatter. The music and laughter continued around him, but David felt a knot forming in his stomach. In his line of work, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that something wasn't right. Carmen must have noticed his expression because she walked over and touched his arm. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. Before David could answer, they heard voices approaching the backyard gate. Not the friendly voices of party guests, but something more official, more serious. The laughter around the pool began to fade as other adults noticed the change in atmosphere. Isabella, still in the pool with her friends, called out, "Daddy, is the cake ready?" David forced a smile and waved at his daughter. "Just a few more minutes, Princess," but his mind was racing. As a civil rights attorney, he'd handled enough cases to know that unexpected visits from law enforcement rarely ended well, especially in situations like this. He'd represented families who'd had their gatherings interrupted, their celebrations turned into nightmares. The footsteps were getting closer, and David could hear at least two different voices. His guests had all gone quiet now, sensing that something was about to happen. Mrs. Patterson looked worried, and David's father had that expression he got when he was preparing for trouble. David set down his beer and walked toward the gate, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. Whatever was about to happen, he would handle it calmly and professionally. He had his family to protect, his guests to consider, and his daughter's birthday to preserve. The sound of the gate latch being tested made everyone in the backyard freeze. Isabella and her friends stopped splashing and looked around, confused by the sudden silence. David took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever was coming next, hoping against hope that his perfect afternoon wouldn't turn into the kind of story he usually only heard about in his law office. The gate swung open without anyone knocking or asking permission. Two police officers walked into David's backyard like they owned the place. The first officer was tall and broad-shouldered, with short gray hair and dark sunglasses that hid his eyes. His name tag read Johnson. The second officer was younger, maybe in his 30s, with a serious expression and his hand resting on his belt. His badge said Martinez. The music kept playing from the deck speakers, but everything else went silent. Even the kids in the pool stopped moving, sensing that something serious was happening. Isabella looked at her father with wide, confused eyes. Officer Johnson looked around the backyard slowly, taking in the decorations, the guests, and the pool full of children. His expression was stern, like he was disappointed by what he saw. "We got a call about a disturbance," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. David stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "Good afternoon, officers. I'm David Rodriguez, and this is my home. We're just having a birthday party for my daughter. Is there a problem?" Officer Johnson ignored the question and kept scanning the crowd. "We got reports of loud music and suspicious activity. Neighbors are complaining." David glanced around at his guests. His parents looked worried and confused. Carmen had moved closer to the pool where Isabella was standing in the shallow end, still wearing her birthday crown. The other parents were pulling their children closer, and Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely frightened. "I'm sorry if we were too loud," David said, though he knew they hadn't been. The music was at a reasonable volume, and it was only 3:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. "I can turn the music down if that helps." Officer Martinez stepped forward and pointed at the adults standing around the pool. "We're going to need to see identification from everyone here." The request hit David like a punch to the stomach. In all his years practicing law, he'd seen this scenario play out too many times. A gathering of families enjoying themselves becomes an interrogation scene for no good reason. "Officer, with respect, these are my invited guests at my private residence," David said carefully. "They're not required to show identification unless you have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity." Officer Johnson's jaw tightened. "Are you telling us how to do our job?" "Not at all," David replied, maintaining his calm tone. "I'm just explaining our rights. This is a private birthday party on private property." The atmosphere in the backyard had shifted completely. What had been a joyful celebration just minutes ago now felt tense and scary. David's father, Miguel, stepped closer to his wife, Rosa, both of them remembering other times when police had made them feel unwelcome in their own community. Carlos, David's brother, kept his hands visible and spoke quietly to his twin boys, telling them to stay close to their mother. Dr. Chen moved protectively near his wife and son, while Tom Johnson looked uncomfortable, clearly unsure of what to do. Officer Martinez walked over to the pool area, where the children were still standing in the water. "How do we know these are all your guests?" he asked David. "How do we know you actually live here?" The question stung, but David had expected it. He pulled out his wallet and showed his driver's license with the address clearly printed on it. "This is my home. I have the deed, mortgage papers, and utility bills if you need to see them. Officer Johnson barely glanced at the license. Anyone can fake documents. We need to verify that everyone here belongs. Isabella, still standing in the pool, raised her small voice. This is my birthday party. These are my friends and my family. Officer Martinez looked down at the little girl and frowned. You need to get out of the pool right now. Carmen immediately moved toward the pool steps. Come here, baby, she called to Isabella, trying to keep her voice steady for her daughter's sake. David felt his anger rising but forced himself to stay calm. Officers, you're frightening the children. This is a birthday party for 8-year-olds. There's no disturbance here, and there's no crime being committed. We'll determine that, Officer Johnson said sharply. Everyone needs to provide identification, and then we'll decide if there's a problem here. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, spoke up in a shaky voice. I live across the street. I can vouch for this family. They're wonderful neighbors. Officer Martinez turned to her with suspicion. How long have you known them? Since they moved in 6 months ago, she replied. They're good people. David helped me carry my groceries just last week. Officer Johnson wasn't satisfied. 6 months isn't very long. People can put on an act for 6 months. David's parents exchanged worried glances. They'd lived through decades of moments like this, where their presence somewhere was questioned, where they had to prove they belonged. Rosa reached for Miguel's hand, and David could see the old fear in their eyes. The Chen family looked uncomfortable and out of place, clearly wishing they could leave but not wanting to abandon their neighbors. Dr. Chen spoke up quietly. Officers, I'm Dr. Chen from Presbyterian Hospital. I can confirm that this family lives here. We're all neighbors. What kind of doctor? Officer Martinez asked suspiciously. Emergency medicine, Dr. Chen replied. Officer Johnson shrugged. Doesn't matter. We still need to see everyone's identification. David knew he had to take control of the situation before it got worse. His legal training kicked in and he spoke with quiet authority. Officers, I need to inform you that you're on private property without a warrant. My guests are under no legal obligation to provide identification. If you suspect criminal activity, please tell us what specific crime you believe is being committed. The two officers looked at each other, and David could see that they weren't used to being challenged so directly. Officer Johnson's face reddened slightly. Are you resisting our investigation? Officer Johnson asked, his voice taking on a threatening tone. I'm exercising our constitutional rights, David replied calmly. And I'm asking you to respect the fact that you're disrupting a child's birthday party without probable cause. Isabella had climbed out of the pool and was now standing next to her mother, still dripping wet and looking scared. The birthday crown sat crooked on her head, and her lip was starting to tremble. This was supposed to be the best day of her year, and instead, she was watching her father face off with angry police officers. Officer Martinez pulled out his radio and spoke into it quietly. David couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but he caught the words uncooperative and backup. The knot in David's stomach tightened. He'd represented enough families to know that when officers called for backup, the situation was about to get much worse. He looked around at his guests, all of whom were depending on him to handle this properly. Carlos caught his eye and gave him a small nod of support. Carmen was holding Isabella close, whispering reassurances to their daughter. Tom and Linda Johnson looked shocked and uncomfortable, clearly realizing that their neighbors were experiencing something they'd never had to face themselves. Officers, David said, making one more attempt at de-escalation. I'm an attorney and I understand you have a job to do, but I also know our rights. We're happy to cooperate, but we need to do this properly. Officer Johnson stepped closer to David, invading his personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. Oh, you're a lawyer? Well, counselor, let me tell you something. We don't care what you think you know. We're investigating a disturbance and everyone here is going to cooperate, or there's going to be a problem. In the distance, David could hear the sound of more police sirens approaching his house. His heart sank as he realized that his daughter's birthday party was about to become something much bigger and much more serious than anyone had expected. The sound of sirens grew louder, and David's heart sank as he realized how quickly things were spiraling out of control. Within minutes, 3 more police cars pulled up to his house, their red and blue lights flashing and creating a circus atmosphere in his quiet neighborhood. Isabella pressed closer to her mother, her birthday crown now sitting askew on her wet hair. Daddy, what's happening? she whispered, her voice small and scared. Officer Johnson seemed energized by the arrival of backup. He straightened his shoulders and spoke louder, as if performing for the additional audience. We need everyone to move away from the pool area immediately. This is now an active investigation. David felt his professional training kick in even stronger. He'd handled cases like this before, but experiencing it firsthand was completely different. Officers, I need to ask again what specific crime you believe is being committed here. You have no probable cause to detain any of these people. Officer Martinez ignored David and addressed the growing crowd of officers who had entered the backyard. We've got an uncooperative subject here, he said, pointing at David. Claims to be a lawyer. Refuses to have his guests provide identification. One of the new officers, a sergeant with silver hair and multiple stripes on his uniform, looked around the scene with confusion. David could see him taking in the birthday decorations, the children's pool toys floating in the water, and the obvious signs of a family celebration. What exactly was the complaint? The sergeant asked. Officer Johnson hesitated for just a moment. Noise disturbance and suspicious activity. David's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been watching everything from her chair in the shade, and now she stood up despite her arthritis. That's nonsense, she said firmly. I live right across the street and there's been no noise problem. These are good people having a birthday party for their little girl. The sergeant looked at Mrs. Patterson with interest. You live in the neighborhood, ma'am. For 42 years, she replied with dignity. And I'm telling you, this family has done nothing wrong. Officer Johnson's face reddened. Ma'am, we need you to step back. You're interfering with our investigation. But Mrs. Patterson had found her courage. What investigation? This is a birthday party. Look around you. There are balloons and birthday cake and children playing in a pool. What exactly are you investigating? David felt a surge of gratitude toward his elderly neighbor, but he also worried that her involvement might make things worse. He could see Officer Johnson getting more agitated, and he knew from experience that agitated officers made dangerous decisions. Carlos, David's brother, had been quietly moving his twin boys toward the back of the yard, trying to keep them away from the confrontation. But now he spoke up. Officers, I'm a teacher at Roosevelt Middle School. These are families with children. This is getting out of hand. Are you interfering too? Officer Martinez asked Carlos. Because we can add obstruction charges to whatever else we find here. David stepped forward, positioning himself between the officers and his family. No one is interfering. We're trying to understand why a children's birthday party has become a police investigation. The sergeant was still looking around the scene, and David could tell he was beginning to have doubts about what his officers had told him. But Officer Johnson wasn't backing down. Sergeant, this subject has been uncooperative from the moment we arrived, Officer Johnson said. He's refusing to allow us to identify his guests, and he's been argumentative and hostile. David knew this was a critical moment. His response could determine whether this situation escalated further or began to de-escalate. He spoke directly to the sergeant, keeping his voice calm and professional. Sergeant, I'm David Rodriguez, and this is my home. I'm an attorney, and I specialize in civil rights law. I understand these officers believe they received a complaint, but I also know our constitutional rights. My guests are under no obligation to provide identification without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The sergeant studied David for a long moment. What kind of civil rights law? Police misconduct cases primarily, David said quietly. I represent families who have experienced violations of their constitutional rights during police encounters. The sergeant's expression shifted slightly, and David could see him processing this information. But Officer Johnson wasn't done yet. Sergeant, this guy thinks because he's a lawyer he can tell us how to do our job. He's been obstructive and uncooperative from the beginning. Isabella, who had been quietly crying against her mother's shoulder, suddenly spoke up. I just wanted to have a birthday party, she said, her voice breaking. Why are the police mad at us? The innocent question from an 8-year-old girl seemed to hang in the air. Even some of the newer officers looked uncomfortable as they took in the scene. A little girl in a swimsuit with a birthday crown, crying because her party had been ruined. Dr. Chen, who had been standing quietly with his family, finally spoke up. Officers, I'm Dr. Chen from Presbyterian Hospital. I've been neighbors with the Rodriguez family for 6 months. They're exemplary people, and this is clearly just a birthday party. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. Officer Martinez turned on Dr. Chen aggressively. Doctor or not, you need to provide identification and prove you belong here. I live 2 houses down, Dr. Chen replied calmly. I can show you my mail if you like. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone except Officers Johnson and Martinez. Here were respected community members, including a doctor and a teacher, being treated like criminals at a child's birthday party. Tom Johnson, David's next-door neighbor, had been standing uncomfortably to the side, clearly struggling with what he was witnessing. Finally, he stepped forward. Officers, I'm Tom Johnson. I live next door. I can confirm that this family lives here, and this is definitely just a birthday party. My wife and I were invited guests. But Officer Johnson was beyond reason now. The arrival of backup had emboldened him, and he seemed determined to find something wrong with the situation. How long have you known them? He demanded of Tom. Since they moved in 6 months ago, Tom replied. 6 months isn't very long, Officer Johnson said, echoing his earlier comment to Mrs. Patterson. People can fool neighbors for 6 months. David's father, Miguel, had been standing quietly, but now he spoke up in accented English. Officer, my son is good man. He work hard. He buy this house for his family. We are proud of him. Officer Martinez turned his attention to Miguel. Are you here legally? The question was like a slap in the face. Miguel had been a U.S. citizen for over 20 years, had worked at the same factory for decades, and had raised 2 sons who both became professionals. But David could see the old fear and humiliation in his father's eyes. He's a U.S. citizen, David said firmly, and that question is completely inappropriate and irrelevant to whatever complaint you think you received. Officer Johnson stepped closer to David, clearly trying to intimidate him. You know what? I think you're the problem here. Your attitude is the problem. Maybe we need to take a closer look at you specifically. The sergeant had been watching this exchange with growing concern. David could see him beginning to realize that his officers had overreacted to whatever complaint they'd received. Carmen, who had been comforting Isabella, finally spoke up. Please, officers, you're scaring our daughter. This is supposed to be the happiest day of her year. Can't we please just end this? But Officer Johnson wasn't finished. He pulled out his handcuffs and looked directly at David. You know what? I think we need to have a conversation downtown. You've been obstructive and uncooperative, and I think there's more going on here than just a birthday party. David felt the blood drain from his face. He could see his wife's terrified expression, his daughter's confusion, and his parents' fear. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, was about to be destroyed by 2 officers who couldn't admit they'd made a mistake. But David also knew something the officers didn't know. His neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson's friend, Betty Chen, had been discreetly recording everything from her kitchen window since the first police car arrived. And David's knowledge of the law was about to become very important. David looked at the handcuffs in Officer Johnson's hands and felt a surge of determination rather than fear. This was the moment when his years of legal training and courtroom experience would either save his family's dignity or be useless against police authority run wild. Officer Johnson, David said, his voice steady and clear. Before you make a decision you'll regret, I need you to understand something. I'm not just any attorney. I specialize in Section 1983 civil rights violations against police departments. Officer Johnson paused, his hand still on the handcuffs. So what? So what, David continued, is that 3 months ago, I won a $2.3 million settlement against this county for almost exactly this situation. A family barbecue that was disrupted by officers who had no probable cause for their actions. The sergeant's head snapped up. David could see recognition dawning in his eyes. You're the lawyer from the Williams case? I am, David confirmed. And right now you have 6 officers in my backyard, intimidating my family and guests at my daughter's birthday party, based on what appears to be a noise complaint that doesn't exist. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. There was a complaint. From whom? David asked. Because I'd like to see the written report, and I'd like to know what specific noise ordinance you believe we've violated on a Saturday afternoon at 3:30. The sergeant was looking around the scene with new eyes now. David could see him taking inventory. Birthday decorations, children's pool toys, elderly grandparents, neighbors who clearly knew and supported the family. Johnson, Martinez, the sergeant said quietly. What exactly was the nature of the complaint you received? Officer Johnson hesitated. Dispatch said there were reports of loud music and suspicious activity. From whom? The sergeant pressed. Officer Martinez checked his notepad. The complaint was anonymous. David smiled grimly. Anonymous complaints require corroboration before action can be taken. That's basic police procedure. When you arrived, did you observe any actual noise violation or suspicious activity? The sergeant was looking increasingly uncomfortable. What did you observe when you arrived? Officer Johnson's confidence was starting to crack. Well, there was music playing and there were a lot of people here. Music at what volume? David asked. And since when is having guests at your own home suspicious activity? Isabella, who had been quietly watching this exchange, tugged on her mother's hand. Mommy, is Daddy in trouble? Carmen knelt down to her daughter's level. No, baby, Daddy knows how to handle this. Mrs. Patterson, emboldened by the turn in conversation, spoke up again. Officer, I was sitting right here the whole time before you arrived. The music wasn't loud at all. I could barely hear it from where I'm sitting. Dr. Chen added, Officers, I'm trained to measure sound levels for medical purposes. This gathering was well within normal limits for a residential area. But David wasn't finished. He had more cards to play. Sergeant, there's something else you should know. One of my guests today is Judge Patricia Williams from the county courthouse. Every officer in the backyard went still. David could see them looking around, trying to figure out which of his guests might be a judge. An older woman who had been sitting quietly near the back of the group stood up. She was in her 60s with silver hair and a calm, authoritative presence. I'm Judge Williams, she said simply. Officer Johnson's face went pale. Judge Williams was well known in the county, respected by everyone in law enforcement. She had a reputation for being fair but strict, and she didn't tolerate constitutional violations in her courtroom. Judge Williams, the sergeant said, his voice suddenly much more respectful. We didn't realize you were here. Judge Williams walked forward slowly, her eyes taking in the scene. Sergeant, I've been observing this interaction for the past 20 minutes. I have to say I'm deeply concerned about what I've witnessed. Officer Johnson tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, we received a complaint about this gathering, and we were just trying to investigate. Judge Williams looked at him steadily. Officer Johnson, isn't it? I believe I've seen you in my courtroom before. Tell me, what specific articulable facts gave you reasonable suspicion to detain these people? Officer Johnson stammered. Well, there was the complaint, and an anonymous complaint, Judge Williams interrupted, which, as you know, requires corroboration. What did you observe when you arrived that corroborated criminal activity? The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Finally, Officer Martinez spoke up. There were a lot of people here and the music was playing. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. Since when is having guests and playing music at a reasonable volume criminal activity? David decided it was time to reveal his final piece of information. There's one more thing, officers. This entire encounter has been recorded. Officer Johnson spun around. What do you mean recorded? David pointed across the street to where Mrs. Patterson's friend Betty lived. Mrs. Chen has been recording from her kitchen window since your first car arrived. She's a retired court reporter, and she has a very good understanding of what constitutes proper police procedure. The sergeant looked like he wanted to disappear. Ma'am, he called out toward the house across the street. Is that true? An elderly, Asian woman appeared at her kitchen window and held up a smartphone. I have the whole thing, she called back. Started recording when I saw the first car pull up with lights flashing for a birthday party. Officer Johnson was now visibly sweating. Sergeant, maybe we should just wrap this up. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. Officers, I want to be very clear about something. What I've witnessed here today appears to be racial profiling and harassment of a family at their own home. This man has been respectful and cooperative while asserting his constitutional rights, and you've responded with intimidation and threats." The sergeant nodded grimly. "Your Honor, I think there may have been some miscommunication here." "Miscommunication?" David asked. "Your officers threatened to arrest me for asserting my family's constitutional rights at our own home. They demanded identification from my guests without probable cause. They frightened my 8-year-old daughter on her birthday." What exactly was the miscommunication? Isabella, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at Judge Williams. "Are you really a judge?" Judge Williams smiled gently at the little girl. "I am, sweetheart. And I want you to know that what happened here today was not right. You and your family did nothing wrong." The sergeant was clearly trying to figure out how to end this situation without making it worse. "Mr. Rodriguez, I apologize for any inconvenience. I think there was a misunderstanding." David looked around at his family and guests. His parents looked shaken but relieved. His brother Carlos was comforting his twin boys. Carmen was still holding Isabella, who looked confused and sad about her ruined party. "Sergeant," David said quietly, "this wasn't an inconvenience. This was a violation of our civil rights. My daughter's birthday party has been destroyed. My elderly parents have been traumatized, and my neighbors have been subjected to inappropriate police action." Judge Williams nodded approvingly. "The sergeant is right that there was a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was that some officers in this department think they can violate citizens' constitutional rights without consequences." Officer Johnson made one last attempt to justify his actions. "We were just doing our job." "No," David said firmly. "You were abusing your authority. And tomorrow morning, I'll be filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, the Mayor's Office, and the County Civil Rights Commission." The sergeant looked defeated. "Officers, we're leaving now. Mr. Rodriguez, again, I apologize." As the police cars finally pulled away from David's house, Isabella looked up at her father with wide eyes. "Daddy, were you scared?" David knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly. "A little bit, Princess. But sometimes being scared doesn't matter as much as doing what's right." Judge Williams approached them as the last police car disappeared around the corner. "David, that was extremely well handled. You should be proud of how you protected your family and maintained your dignity." "Thank you, Judge Williams. But I have to ask, what are you really doing at my daughter's birthday party?" Judge Williams smiled. "I'm Carmen's aunt. She invited me weeks ago, but she told me to keep it quiet because she wanted it to be a surprise for you." David looked at his wife in amazement. Carmen grinned sheepishly. "Surprise?" The revelation that Judge Williams was Carmen's aunt added an unexpected twist to an already incredible day, but David barely had time to process it. Within hours of the police leaving his backyard, his neighbor Mrs. Chen had uploaded the video to social media with a simple caption, "This is what happens when a family tries to celebrate a child's birthday." The video spread like wildfire. By Sunday evening, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. By Monday morning, that number had jumped to over 1 million. Local news stations picked up the story, and by Tuesday, national outlets were calling David's office for interviews. The video was powerful because it showed everything clearly. Officer Johnson's aggressive stance, the frightened children in the pool, Isabella in her birthday crown asking why the police were mad at them, and David's calm, professional responses throughout the encounter. Most importantly, it captured the moment when Judge Williams revealed herself and the officers' shocked reactions. David spent Monday morning on the phone with reporters, but he was careful with his words. As an attorney, he knew that anything he said could affect potential legal proceedings. But he also knew that public pressure was often the only thing that created real change in police departments. The police department's first response was predictably defensive. Chief Robert Hayes issued a statement saying that the officers had responded to a legitimate complaint and followed proper procedures. But by Tuesday, after the video had been seen by millions of people and local politicians started demanding answers, the tone began to change. Mayor Rebecca Thompson called David personally on Tuesday afternoon. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've seen the video, and I want you to know that this is not how we want our police department to operate. I'm ordering a full investigation." "I appreciate that, Mayor Thompson," David replied, "but I hope you understand that this isn't just about my family. This is about a pattern of behavior that affects families throughout our community." David was right about the pattern. Within days of the video going viral, Other families began coming forward with similar stories. The Rodriguez case had given them courage to speak up about their own experiences with aggressive policing during family gatherings, traffic stops, and routine interactions. Mrs. Patterson became an unexpected hero in the story. At 78 years old, she gave interviews to several news stations, speaking passionately about her neighbors and the injustice she had witnessed. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 42 years, she told a local reporter. "I've never seen police treat anyone the way they treated that family. It was shameful." The internal affairs investigation moved quickly, partly because the evidence was so clear and partly because of the public attention. Within a week, both Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez were suspended pending a full review. The department also announced new training requirements for all officers on constitutional rights and community policing. But David wasn't satisfied with just disciplinary action. He knew that real change required systemic reform. Working with the local NAACP chapter and other civil rights organizations, he drafted a comprehensive proposal for police reform that addressed training, accountability, and community oversight. The proposal included mandatory de-escalation training, body cameras for all officers, civilian oversight of complaints, and regular community meetings between police and residents. Most importantly, it called for officers who violated citizens' constitutional rights to face real consequences, not just brief suspensions. Judge Williams, despite being Carmen's aunt, recused herself from any legal proceedings, but she used her position to advocate for reform within the judicial system. "What I witnessed in that backyard was unacceptable," she said at a county commissioners' meeting, "and it's our responsibility to ensure it never happens again." The most surprising development came 2 weeks after the incident. David received a call from Mrs. Chen, his neighbor who had recorded the video. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have something to tell you. I wasn't just randomly recording that day." David met with Mrs. Chen at her kitchen table, where she explained that she had been watching police activity in their neighborhood for months. As a retired court reporter, she understood the importance of documentation. She had recorded 3 previous incidents where she felt police had overreacted to routine situations. "I've been waiting for the right moment to come forward," she explained. "Your case gave me the courage to speak up about everything I've seen." Mrs. Chen's additional recordings provided evidence of a pattern that went far beyond David's case. The police department's claims that the birthday party incident was an isolated misunderstanding became impossible to maintain. Officer Johnson was ultimately terminated from the department. Officer Martinez received a lengthy suspension and was required to complete extensive retraining before returning to duty. The sergeant who had supervised the scene was demoted and transferred to a desk position. But the real victory came 6 months later, when the city council unanimously approved David's police reform proposal. The new policies included everything he had requested: mandatory training, civilian oversight, body cameras, and real accountability for officers who violated constitutional rights. David used the settlement money from his lawsuit against the city to establish a scholarship fund for students from underserved communities who wanted to pursue careers in law, civil rights, or public service. The fund was named the Isabella Rodriguez Scholarship, after his daughter who had shown such courage during the incident. Isabella, now 9 years old, had processed the experience in the way that children do. She understood that the police officers had made a mistake and that her father had stood up for what was right. She told her friends at school that her daddy was a hero, but David knew the real heroes were the neighbors and community members who had supported his family when it mattered most. Mrs. Patterson became like an adopted grandmother to Isabella, teaching her to bake cookies and sharing stories about the neighborhood's history. Dr. Chen and his family remained close friends, and their teenage son Kevin still helped Isabella with her swimming during the summer. The annual neighborhood barbecue the following July was a celebration of more than just summer. It was a celebration of a community that had come together to support justice and accountability. Police Chief Hayes, who had implemented all of David's recommended reforms, attended the barbecue and personally apologized to the Rodriguez family. "This community is stronger because of what happened," Chief Hayes told David. "We learned that real community policing means being accountable to the community, not just patrolling it." Isabella's 9th birthday party was held in the same backyard, with the same pool and many of the same guests. But this time there were no unwelcome visitors. The party was peaceful, joyful, and everything a child's birthday should be. As David watched his daughter blow out her candles, surrounded by family and friends, he reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. A single act of standing up for constitutional rights had transformed not just his family's life, but his entire community's relationship with law enforcement. Judge Williams, still present as Carmen's aunt but now also as a family friend, raised her glass of lemonade in a toast. To Isabella, for reminding us that justice isn't just about laws and courtrooms. It's about protecting the right of every child to celebrate their birthday in peace. The officers who had tried to intimidate David at his pool had learned that intimidation doesn't work when people know their rights and have the courage to defend them. More importantly, they had learned that in a democracy, everyone is accountable to the community they serve. David's story became a case study in police academies across the country, teaching new officers about constitutional rights, community relations, and the importance of de-escalation. It reminded everyone that real change often begins in the most unexpected places, like a backyard birthday party, where one family decided to stand up for what was right.